now very dark and swollen. I moved closer and looked at the book. It was mostly about the decor of each of the main rooms that Jackie O had changed in the 1960s. The useful stuff was at the back, in an appendix, floor plans of both wings, west and east, plus the executive mansion in between. There was no way of telling if the layout was still the same, but that was all we had, apart from my memory of Josh's guided tour. I looked up to read her eyes, and they told me she was already walking into the White House press room. Her work cassette was in. I threw off the duvet and headed for the shower. I came back 10 minutes later, drying my hair with a towel, to find her already dressed, apart from her jacket and shoes. "Let's go down and find out what's happening. I'll shower later." She waited while I threw on my clothes and followed her. Armageddon was well underway in the dining room. Spoons crashed into cereal bowls. Chairs scraped on the wooden floor. The toaster popped. Maria tutted and fussed. In amongst all this, the kids were practicing their songs. The problem was that they were all in different time. It sounded like cats on heat. I tried to remind myself that this was a celebration of peace, rather than a declaration of war. Josh had his back to me, doing some magic act with lunchboxes. He looked like a TV chef, cooking 10 things at once, wrapping sandwiches in cling film, washing apples, throwing in handfuls of cheese snacks. He was wearing navy blue suit trousers and a freshly ironed white shirt. I could see his white t-shirt underneath, and the dark skin of his arms. I couldn't wait to see his tie. The thing that worried me was that he had a light brown pancake holster just behind his right hip, and a double mag carrier on his left. I just hoped he didn't end up having to use what would be going in there on us two. I checked with Sarah. She'd clocked his gear too. Josh didn't even look round as I came in. He just called out, "Morning! Coffee's in the machine over to the left." I could see the percolator bubbling away. "Bagels are by the toaster. Can't stop. Gotta get these ready before Puff Daddy and his backing crew here are picked up for their gig." I went over and split some of the pre-cut bagels, putting a couple in the toaster as Sarah poured some coffee. We put on a good show, as if I knew that she liked nothing better than toasted bagels for breakfast, and didn't even have to ask. And she knew exactly how I liked my coffee. She asked Josh if he wanted some, and he looked up from the lunchboxes for a second, nodded and smiled. She poured. "So, what are our chances, Josh?" He had his back to us again, jamming too much food into a Little Mermaid lunchbox. "I was going to give them a call at the top of the hour," he said, "just after the shift change." He finished loading up the Little Mermaid and glanced at his watch. "Tell you what, let's see if I can get hold of the guy now." He walked over to the wall telephone and dialed, hooked the receiver with about a 10-foot lead between his shoulder and ear, then walked back to put the lunchboxes into the kids' day sacks. He had sold out. His tie was just plain old blue. He saw me looking at it in disgust, annoyed that there was nothing I could take the piss out of. He grinned back at me. The day sacks were made of clear plastic, the only sort of bag that could be taken into some American schools now, because the kids had to show they only held books and lunchboxes and not guns. I imagined that White House security would have thought them a good idea too. I could hear cartoons on the TV next door. That worried me. It meant they'd finished breakfast and were killing time. In this house, there was never any TV while there were meals to be eaten or work to be done. I looked at my watch. It was 7:32. He got an answer. "Yo, it's Josh." There was a gap. "Yeah, absolutely fine. I'll be there today anyway to watch my kids. We can talk then." They spun more work shit for a while, and had an in-joke about their president. The toaster popped up, I picked up the bagels and went to the fridge, digging out some spread. Sarah's eyes followed me as she crossed to sit at the kitchen table. She looked like a student waiting for her finals results. I deliberately didn't look at Josh. If he turned, I didn't want any eye to eye. Our unconscious bubbles away inside, and mostly we manage never to let people see in. The only place they can is our eyes. I'd spent most of my life controlling it, but Josh knew the score. He'd been there too. I just concentrated hard on the bagel as I spread and listened. He finished waffling and got down to business. "Who's the shift coordinator today?" "All right. Is Davy boy in?" He sounded pleased. I walked across the kitchen and sat next to Sarah. She had her hands round her mug, just sipping slowly, taking fantastic interest in the coffee's molecular structure. Josh was still gobbing off on the phone with his back to us and zipping up the day sacks. Once he'd done that, he walked over to us and dumped them on the table, still waffling. "I've got two really good friends here, over from the UK, and I want to bring them in for a visit. What do you say, bud?" He smiled at whatever was being said at the other end. "Yeah, today." "Yeah, I know. But it's their only chance, man." "Yeah, that's okay." He looked at his watch, placed his thumb on the cutout, looked at us and said, "Call back in 30. Both of us managed a genuine look of happiness, but I was bluffing big time. We had a problem if the kids left before we got the okay for the visit. I checked my watch again. It was now 7:39. Josh smiled too, feeling good about himself as he sat down at the table with his coffee. Sarah sounded excited. "I'll go and get ready then. See you both soon." She gave my shoulder a loving squeeze and disappeared. Josh checked the kitchen. His jobs were done. We drank coffee in silence. He ate a bagel and listened to Maria still shouting at the kids in the next room. I said, "When do the kids leave, Josh?" "It's a bit early for a 1 o'clock start, isn't it?" "About 8. A school bus will pick them up and take them downtown. Dress rehearsals, man. I'll be glad when this is all over. This quilt business seems to have taken over my life." I nodded. I knew exactly what he meant. I tried to fill the silence. "What's the dress code?" I said. "I don't want to let you down." "Hey, no problem, man. I just gotta look good. It's my job." We continued to drink our brews and gob off. I asked if I could borrow one of his ties. He was about to clip me over the head when a shout came from the dining room. "Daddy! Daddy!" There was some whinging going on, and Maria was just about to go ballistic. He got up. "Back in 5. He went out with a smile on his face. Mine dropped. I checked again. 7:45. 15 minutes till the kids left, but closer to 25 before we got the go or no-go for the visit. Not good. I needed the kids here just in case we had a no-go. Otherwise, plan B wouldn't work. Time to get my finger out of my arse and get in gear. I put my coffee down and went upstairs. Sarah's shower was running and she was standing naked by the curtain, just about to step in. I said nothing, but went to my bag and pulled out the 9mm, checked chamber and put the safety on. She came over to me, putting her mouth right against my ear as she asked what was happening. I placed the weapon in the waistband of my jeans and pulled out my shirt to cover it. The kids could be leaving before Josh gets the go or no-go. She leaned over the chair, got her clothes and started to dress, muttering, "Shit, shit, shit." "You wait here and stand by. If I have to go for it, you'll hear. If so, get down to me and be quick about it. Remember, don't kill him, okay? Do you remember what to do?" She nodded as she tucked her shirt into her trousers. I still wanted to run through it with her. We couldn't afford to fuck up now. If it's a no-go, I'll hold them here, and you will have to go with Josh on your own. Can you handle that? She nodded again, without looking up. Good. Remember, he will do whatever you say if the kids are hostages. Make sure you keep reminding him about his kids. This time she stopped dressing and looked up at me. Good luck, I said quietly. She smiled. And you? Checking my shirt, I went downstairs, leaving Sarah as she checked that there was a round in the chamber, ready to go. The bags had gone from the kitchen, but kid-type noise was still coming from the TV room. Josh came back in from giving them their day sacks. What's the score up there, then? Eh? He jerked his head to indicate upstairs. Is it serious? I think so, mate. I hope so. He had a big smile on his face. She's magic, man. She'd make my head spin. Tell me about it. I sat down to finish my coffee, with a sly check of Baby G. It was 7:57. 3 minutes and the kids could be leaving. Still over 10 before the call. Dakota came into the kitchen, very excited about the day's program. Hi, Nick. Are you and Sarah hanging out with Daddy today, so you can see us sing? It's going to be so cool. Josh tried to calm her down. Wow, chill. We don't know yet. We're waiting on a call. You'd better say goodbye to Nick now, just in case. With that, he went back into the TV room to usher the others into the kitchen. Dakota came over and gave me a hug. It must have felt as strange for her as it did for me. I was holding back. I didn't want her to feel the weapon. If I don't see you this afternoon, I'll call you all soon. With Kelly, okay? By now the others were coming through, more interested in what they were missing on the TV than in saying goodbye. Josh was getting them organized. I'll go upstairs and say goodbye to Sarah. Holler through the door if she's in the shower. Off they scrambled. I heard their shouts and hers in return. Josh was on the doorstep with Maria. It looked as if she was finished until this afternoon. Good. One less to worry about. It was 8 o'clock. Things could start getting scary soon. I made sure my work cassette was in and stayed there. At least Josh's holster wasn't full yet. It never was with the kids around. I heard the hiss of air brakes outside. The bus is here. Kids, let's go. There was a thumping on the staircase and one in my heart as I walked into the hall to stop them, hand now reaching under my shirt. They saw me. Bye, Nick. See you this afternoon. The phone rang, and Josh came past me, back into the kitchen, sounding exasperated. Come on, kids, get your bags. Bus is waiting. Through the open kitchen door, I saw him answer the phone. I was standing in their way as they were about to turn left towards the door that led from the hallway into the TV room. I put my hand around the pistol grip. I knew it would work. People don't fuck about when it comes to their children. Sarah was at the top of the stairs, weapons drawn, 5 steps behind. The worst scenario I could imagine couldn't be stopped now. She was walking down the stairs, pistol behind her in case one of the children looked back. I slowed the herd. Hey, don't go yet. I think your dad wants you all in the kitchen. He's finding out if Sarah and I are coming to see you all sing today. They turned left through the door to their dad. I had eye to eye with Sarah. She was nearing the bottom of the stairs and was placing her weapon in her trouser band. Remember what I said. She nodded as we both went into the kitchen with the last of the kids. He got to the end of his call and the kids were all over him, wanting to know. Right, we're on at 10, he beamed. The kids cheered, and we both cheered with them. Well done. I had a big smile on my face. Thanks a lot, mate. Brilliant. He remembered the bus. What are you guys doing here? Go, go! he shooed them out towards the front door. I heard the hiss of the bus's air brakes and the chug of diesel as it dragged itself down the road. Josh came back into the kitchen and collapsed onto a chair with a loud sigh, pouring himself some more coffee as he looked up at Sarah. "Come back, Jerry. All is forgiven." He looked at me. "Great news, huh? To tell you the truth, I'm quite looking forward to it myself." Sarah laughed, more out of relief than anything else. "Say, do you guys have a camera?" We didn't. "No problem. We can pick one up from a store. I'm quite looking forward to going downtown. I miss working the team, man." He took another slug of coffee. "This job is driving me crazy. Know what I'm saying? I've got to get back on ops." Tilting his head back, he killed the coffee. "I'm going to make a call to arrange parking. It's a nightmare up there." Sarah stood up. "I'll finish getting ready and pack." I followed her out to the stairs and passed over my weapon. In the bags. I was back at the coffee percolator as Josh finished his call. I motioned to see if he wanted more, and he nodded. The phone went back on the wall and he came to the table. I took a seat beside him. "We'll just have to wait now while she puts her face on." He smiled as he unfolded the newspaper. I started to flap as the Washington Post was laid out on the tabletop, but the chances of the story still being in there after 3 days were pretty slim, especially given the amount of column inches devoted to events at the White House. "Anything interesting?" "Hell no. Just the normal shit." He turned the paper round to show me the front page, pictures of Netanyahu and Arafat in town yesterday. The subject was a bit too close to home for me at the moment. He turned the paper back as I asked, "What do you think, mate? Think it will work? You know, the peace deal." He started to give his views on the summit. Not that I was listening, but I wanted him to talk, which was why I'd asked the question in the first place. The more he was gobbing off, the more I could just sit there and nod and agree or throw in the odd question, but at the same time get myself revved up for the job. I was in my own little world, so relieved the call had brought good news. I heard Sarah coming down the stairs. It brought me back to the real world. He was now honking about all the roadworks and the DC traffic as Sarah came into the room with our bags and my jacket. She may not have had time for a shower, but she'd made up for it with eyeliner and lip gloss. Josh stood up, looking at his watch. "Okay, let's saddle up." I picked up our 2 bags while Josh ran upstairs. He didn't say why, but we both knew that it was to fetch his weapon. Chapter 26. A bleep came from the pickup and the lights flashed. Josh jumped into the cab and Sarah and I went round to the passenger side. As I opened the door, a toy racing car fell out. Crayons, a colouring sheet from McDonald's and other kids' crap littered the footwell. I put our bags in the back. Our weapons were inside now and would stay there. Sarah picked up the toy from the sidewalk and climbed in. I followed. There was room enough for 3 in the front seat. The morning sky was still overcast, but bright when the sun came out between the clouds. I had to squint as I looked through the windscreen. A pair of mirrored sunglasses were hanging by their cord from the rearview mirror. Josh put them on over his shiny head and fired up the ignition. The engine gave a big 4-litre growl, and out we backed, the antenna automatically starting to rise. The radio came on, and to my surprise it was a woman talking about the place of Jesus in today's world. Josh looked at me, obviously feeling that my unasked question needed an answer. "Christian channel," he said, not at all defensively. "A couple of guys got me into listening. It's been a help. I've even started going to a few meetings with them." I said, "That's good, Josh," and wondered if his Bible studies had got as far as Judas yet. We headed north, back along the route by which the taxi had brought us. Josh chatted about how long it had been since he'd been to the White House and what he missed about working there. The thing he didn't miss, he said, as we gradually crawled our way to D.C., was the traffic. He hated it, as if we didn't know by now. Sarah saw a filling station coming up and reminded Josh to stop for a one-shot camera. 25 minutes after leaving the house, we were back on the Jefferson Davis Highway approaching the Pentagon. Instead of passing it, however, we took a right onto a bridge that took us across the Potomac. Josh became the tourist guide. Left, that's the Jefferson Memorial, and further over is the Lincoln Memorial. Sarah, you gotta get Nick to take you to the reflecting pool at sunset. It's real romantic, just like the movies. We had plenty of time to admire the view, as the traffic was backed up from halfway over the bridge. Eventually we started heading north on 14th Street, bisecting the vast stretch of grass that is the National Mall, running from the Capitol building all the way down the Lincoln Memorial by the Potomac. Once over the mall, we made a few turns. Josh said, "Here we are, where all the dirty deeds are done." We drove past the Target, leaving it to our left. We have to go round because of the one-way system. But that's cool. You get to see it from all sides. Once we'd done a circuit anti-clockwise, we landed up on 17th Street. The front of the White House faced north, sandwiched between two gardens. Lafayette Park, which was part of the pedestrian area in the front, now that Pennsylvania Avenue was closed to traffic, and at the rear, backing onto the National Mall, the Ellipse. A large area of green that looked as if it had become a giant car park for government permit holders. The White House was flanked to the west by the old executive office, and to the east by the Treasury Department. Each of the two buildings had an access road between it and the White House, but both were closed to traffic. West Executive Avenue was closed off to pedestrians as well, but East Executive Avenue wasn't, to allow the public entry through the east wing of the White House. We turned left and slowed down. Rows of cars were parked on the grass of the Ellipse, and in amongst them was a line of about a dozen yellow school buses. Josh indicated again. The road had originally bent round, away from the White House, but had since been blocked off to create yet another car park. We passed the gates to West Executive Avenue and stopped on the corner of State Place. Josh opened the window and put his hand out. "Yo!" He got a nod from a man dressed in a grey single-breasted suit and what looked like a reddish tie. He'd been standing by the gates and started to amble towards us. "Davy boy, long time." "Yo, Josh, good to see you." Sarah and I looked at each other as they exchanged greetings. She had the same concern as I did. Was this guy going to stay with us? "How goes it, Davy? Get a place for me?" Davy continued towards the wagon. I could see his tie now. Lots of small Dalmatians on a red background. "Hey, you know what? Just park in the West Exec duty pool." As we got out of the vehicle, Josh clapped Davy enthusiastically across the shoulders. "Come here. Let me introduce you to my friends from the UK. This is Sarah." They shook hands. "And this is Nick." We pressed the flesh. "Hey, good to see you. Welcome." Davy was in his mid-30s, and very open and friendly. He was also tall, fit, good-looking, and had all his own teeth, white and perfect. If he hadn't been in the Secret Service, a great career would have beckoned as the Diet Coke man. Davy had everything arranged. "I'll take you guys to the gatehouse, get you an ID pass each and take you in. As you know, it's kind of busy today, but we'll do what we can for you." Sarah and I gushed our thanks as we started to walk off with him. Josh cut in from behind us. "See you folks in a few." I heard his door close and the wagon start to move. Davy did all the small talk. "Take long to get here?" I looked at my watch. It was 10:16. No, not really. Just over an hour. That's good. Was he complaining about the traffic? He did nothing but moan. Davy boy liked that one. It seemed that nothing had changed with his old workmate. Josh's black Dodge passed us on the way to the gates that would let him into West Executive Avenue. We were going there as well, but via the security gatehouse. Josh stopped at the big, black iron gates, which opened automatically for him. The gatehouse was to the left, with a turnstile and airport-style metal detector. From a distance, it had looked as if it was made of white PVC and glass, like a conservatory. As we got nearer, I could see that it wasn't. The white paint covered steel, and the glass was so thick I could only just make out movement inside. As the gates closed behind him, I could see Josh parking in line, nose into the pavement, about 50 metres up on the left-hand side. There was a big round of applause to my right, and the roar of excited children's voices coming from a huge marquee which had been erected in the rear White House gardens. Davy grinned. There are about 200 of them in there. Been practicing all morning. He screwed up his face as the applause continued. At least they think they're good. I could see more clearly into the gatehouse now that we'd gone through the fence, turned right, and were standing by the metal detector. Just beyond that was the turnstile. 2 bodies were inside the gatehouse. The door opened and one of them came out. An electric buzz came from the turnstile as Josh came through to join us. The guard was white and in his 40s. His Secret Service uniform was a very sharply pressed white shirt, a black tie, black trousers with a yellow stripe, and black patent leather belt kit, holding a semi-automatic pistol and spare mags. He couldn't wait to have a go at Josh. Things must be getting desperate round here if they're bringing you back. Josh laughed. He'd obviously had this for years from this guy, because he gave him the finger as he replied, I've been sent to get rid of all the dead wood. So you'd better watch out, lord ass. Everybody contributed to the banter as the fat one slapped his stomach. Sarah and I were the gooseberries in this, so we just kept our mouths shut and concentrated on looking awestruck at standing so close to the official residence of the most powerful man on earth. I could see that Lardass and a younger black guy who was still inside the gatehouse were also responsible for manning a bank of TV monitors and radios. Davy got hold of a clipboard and went through the signing-in procedure. Nick, surname, please. Stone. Being with Josh, there was no option but to reply truthfully. Okay, S-T-O-N-E. There was a few seconds' pause as he finished writing. And Sarah? Darnley. He frowned, and she spelled it for him as she wiped her new glasses with a tissue from her pocket. Okay, if you can just sign here and here for me, please. The first signature was for the ID card, the second for the entry log. Josh then signed himself in as well. Davy gave the clipboard back to the guard, who handed Sarah and me each an ID card. Lardass smiled at Sarah as he passed her card over. You're not going to let these 2 losers show you around, are you? I guess I'm stuck with them for now. He smiled and shook his head. The only place these 2 know is the canteen. You'll just be eating donuts and drinking coffee all day, and look what that did for me. He looked down at his belly. We joined in the laughter. Mine was out of sheer relief at getting even this far. It appeared that we weren't quite in the good lads club, because we didn't have our cards on nylon straps. We had clips with a black V on a white background. Not for visitor, but volunteer. It must have been part of the deal, today being busy. No visitors. It seemed Davy and Josh had made a real effort for us. I hated that. It made me feel even more guilty. But I'd live. At least, I hoped I would. Our IDs looked quite different from the ones Davy and Josh were wearing. Theirs had a blue edge surrounding their pictures, and some red markings underneath. We clipped ours onto our jackets, and Davy clapped and rubbed his hands together. "Okay, people, let's do this thing." He walked around the detector and waited with Josh as we walked through it. As we all went through the turnstile, I didn't know which feeling inside me was stronger. Elation at getting past the first hurdle, or concern that I was now fenced in and the clock was ticking. We walked north along West Exec Avenue. We weren't inside the actual grounds yet, as the iron fencing that stretched away from the gate divided the White House from the road. We seemed to be aiming for an entrance about 50 metres further up, which opened onto the front White House lawn. Looking through into the gardens, I could see the rear of the main building and the marquee. A member of the emergency response team was standing under a tree, talking into his radio as he watched the road. And us. He really looked the business. He was dressed from head to foot in black coveralls, black belt kit, body armour and boots. He had a baseball cap with ERT on the front and a pager that was hooked onto the leg strapping that went round his thigh to keep his pistol and holster in place. It looked as if his main weapon, probably an MP5, was covered by a black nylon support across his chest. Josh took a back seat as Davy started to give us the brief while we continued towards the gate. "Regardless of what people think, this place is basically just an office complex. Over to the left-hand side." We looked over at the old exec building in perfect unison, like a group of Japanese tourists. "That's where the VP's office is. And that's also the Indian Treaty Room. It's a fantastic site. I'll try and get you in there later on, especially if our little tour the other side of the fence is cut short." We carried on up the road between the two buildings, basically just listening to Davy Boy. The more you listen, the less you have to say and the less you can fuck up. And the more time you can spend looking for anyone who looks remotely like a dark-skinned Al Gore or Bill Gates. Walking purposefully between the two buildings via the gate were men in conservative suits and women in identical two-pieces, each with an ID card dangling on a nylon cord. Television and power cables snaked across the tarmac. And at the top of the road, where it met Pennsylvania Avenue, satellite trucks were jammed onto every available square inch of space. As we got to within 10 metres or so of the gate, I saw Monica Beach in front of me, on the White House side of the fence. I looked at Sarah. She'd seen it too. Multicoloured umbrellas were pitched high to keep the light out of the camera lenses. Spotlights were rigged up for the reporters to look good in front of the cameras, and there were yet more power cables. They seemed to have a life of their own. The whole place looked like a Hollywood location. Beyond Monica Beach, I could see another gatehouse, which I guessed was the press entrance point from Pennsylvania Avenue. Throngs of people with videos and cameras jostled against the railings to get a good shot of the building. They seemed to be photographing everything that moved, maybe in the hope of capturing some celebrity to show the folks back home. If this all went to ratchet in a few hours' time, I guessed the police would be appealing for them to hand in their footage. Davy continued to give us the general picture as we stood at the gate. There was a bit of a bottleneck as ERT and uniformed Secret Service security scrutinized the IDs of everybody who was waiting to go through. The White House can be broken down into 3 main parts. The East Wing. He pointed to the far side of the main house. We looked, but I was more intent on scanning the faces of the news crews that were walking from the building up to the beach. Then, in the middle, the Executive Mansion. That's the part you always see in newsreels. As you can see just outside on the lawn is where the ceremony will take place. The kids will be doing their thing in front of the stage. Arranged on the stage were a couple of rows of chairs and 2 lecterns emblazoned with the presidential seal. The flags of Israel, Palestine, and the United States were being unfurled on flagpoles. The scene looked idyllic. Sarah was watching the hordes of tourists poking their video cameras through the fence. Isn't it dangerous to be so exposed to the road? Davy shook his head. No, they'll close off Penn Ave soon. He pointed to our side of the executive mansion. This here is the West Wing, used mainly for administration and press briefings, as you can see. He nodded over to the TV crews behind us. We turned, and it gave both of us an opportunity to have a good look at the personnel. I couldn't see anyone who looked remotely like our targets. In any case, these guys were technicians sorting out camera gear, not reporters. We just had to get back to playing the tourist. The Oval Office is in the West Wing, and not in the Executive Mansion, Davy went on. That's why these guys, he pointed at the crowd by the fence, never get to see him. They're always looking at the wrong place, and from the wrong side. The Oval Office overlooks where all the kids are at the moment. Still, we waited, shuffling forward towards the security. Now and again, Josh and Davy waved at somebody they recognized. We moved out of the way so that a group of sharply dressed men and women could come through the gate onto the road. One of the women recognized Josh. Well, Mr. D'Souza, what brings you to town? Josh stepped to one side with a larger-than-normal smile on his face. I thought I'd just drop in and say, hey. We stood and waited for a few seconds so that he could finish his conversation. I could hear him talking about his kids being part of the ceremony. Sarah suddenly remembered something. Oh no, the camera! I've left it in the car. Josh heard and turned his head. Hey, no problem. I'll open the truck. Sarah didn't want to mess up the conversation. That's okay, I'll do it. She held out her hand for the keys and Josh presented them. I'd forgotten it too. We were going to need it, as we were tourists on a once-in-a-lifetime trip. Josh looked at me as if I was a mophead. We now know who's the one with the smarts. Then he turned back to his conversation. We waited until Sarah ran back to us with the camera in her hand, and Davy continued the tour. Come on, I'll show you something that you see on the news every day. Following yet more power cables, we were walking along the pathway that led from the gate to the front of the East Wing. We went down a few steps and passed a door with a small, white, semicircular canopy over it. More power cables spewed over the ground, and a portable generator was chugging away to my left. Every time we passed groups of people, I watched Sarah for a reaction. She was the only one who could give a positive ID on these people. I could only make possibles. Here we are? We'd arrived at a large glass-panelled door. I looked to the left and saw a satellite truck backed up against the side of the main stone staircase, which was the north portico of the executive mansion. Under the staircase were open doors leading into the ground floor. A flight above it led to the first floor and the main entrance. Davy ushered us through, and we were immediately confronted by a very familiar sight. The lectern, with a presidential seal from which I'd seen so many White House statements delivered. The room looked very purposeful and businesslike, but was much smaller than I'd imagined. Facing the lectern were plastic chairs, arranged in rows with a centre aisle. It looked more like the setup for a community meeting in the local village hall, except that there were wires everywhere on the floor, with camera crews sorting out TV equipment and mics. I was busily scanning the room, looking at the dozen or so people who were in a frenzy preparing for the afternoon's events. Josh looked at us both. You got your camera? I played dumb. What? Your camera. There was a big laugh. He said, Go on, get up there. Sarah and I looked at each other and I thought, fuck it. We've got to do it. It would be unusual not to. Josh took pictures of each of us at the lectern and one of us together. We put our arms around each other for it and smiled. He threw the camera at me as we walked towards him. Something to show your grandchildren. On cue, Sarah and I exchanged the expected coy smile. We came out of the press conference area and back onto the pathway. Davy was looking at the satellite truck. Josh was still saying hello to everyone he knew and explaining to them why he was here. Davy had made up his mind. "Hey, you know what? I think we will go round the other side. It's kind of busy in there." Shading our eyes from a sudden burst of brilliant sunshine, we started to walk up the small flight of stairs that would take us to the same level as the main entrance staircase. Still no Al or Bill. But we were a bit early. What we were going to do when we pinged them, I hadn't actually worked out yet. It all depended on the situation. I hoped we could get Josh to take action, alert him that something was wrong, or maybe I'd say that I'd seen people I could positively ID as terrorists. Whatever, it didn't matter, as long as these people stopped them. All we had to do was find them first. I asked, "Davy, when do the rest of the media arrive, mate? Do they go anywhere to get instructions and stuff like that?" He pointed back to the press room. "The media get a briefing in there at noon. The TV presentation guys won't pitch up until then. They just have their sound and lighting people rig up first." I looked excited. "Would it be possible to see the briefing? I'm a bit of a media junkie. I really like that sort of thing." Davy looked at me as if I was mad. How could something like that be interesting? "Sure, no problem." I looked over at Sarah as we walked. She knew what I was doing. All we had to do was keep this up until midday. If the players were going to show, they'd be at the media brief. We'd reached the bottom of the stairs of the north portico leading into the mansion. Davy pointed to the stage on the grass opposite, still receiving its finishing touches. He nodded towards Pennsylvania Avenue. "The cameras will be on that side of the stage, with the TV reports made from the media area we passed earlier." We both nodded and looked extremely interested, which wasn't difficult. Josh wasn't so enthralled. He asked Davy, "Where to now?" "You want to see the alley?" We continued to walk past the executive mansion towards the east wing. The drive we were walking on went from the white gatehouse the press used and swept in a semicircle to the far right of the lawn, where there was a similar security post. An ERT guy was walking towards it from a line of black Chevy pickups parked in line on the driveway. Their red and blue light racks, darkened windows and antenna made me remember that there were probably more guns within a 200-meter radius of where we were standing than Jim's had sold in its lifetime. We would have to be careful not to get zapped ourselves when they took on the players. We now had an uninterrupted view down into the lower area the other side of the staircase. I couldn't help noticing the paint. It was more cream than white, and it was peeling. We moved a bit further along and went down some steps that took us below the level of the grass. At the bottom, Davy turned and walked backward so he could face us as he explained, "This is the part the public don't get to see." We bent down to get past some large steel ventilation pipes. He pointed at the executive mansion. "This is really the ground floor. Behind this wall are some of the staterooms, like the diplomatic reception room, the China room, that kind of thing." He indicated the area below us. "But this is more interesting. The basement. That's where it's at. In fact, there are 2 basements. Bowling, rest areas, paint shop, and repairs. There's even a bomb shelter down there." Looking to the right, I saw windows that opened onto rooms under the White House driveway and lawn. We came to a white, glass-panelled double door. Actually, it was more grey than white now. You could tell this was the admin area. Davy kept the door open for me and Sarah. Josh followed. We were now under the main staircase. Across the way, the satellite crew were working under the eagle eye of an ERT escort. Davy gave him a wave. "Hi, Jeff. Good to see you, man." Davy steered us towards the door that was nearest the other entrance, into which all the cables seemed to lead. Once through it, I was hit straight away by the smell. The heavy odour of school dinners and cleaning products that I'd known as a child, and which, as I got older, I came to associate with army cookhouses or stairways of low-rent accommodation. We were in a hall about 4 metres wide, with polished floor tiles. The walls were stone, with a plaster skim and many years' worth of cream gloss paint. Grooves and concave shapes had been gouged into the plaster by carelessly pushed food trolleys, an empty one of which was parked up in the corridor. Following the cables, we passed a lift and staircase on our left, then went through another door. It was like walking into a different world. We emerged into the opulent splendour of marble walls and glass chandeliers, hanging from high cross-vaulted ceilings. The smell had disappeared. Blocking the view to our left were 2 tall brown screens, positioned like a roadblock. Davy and Josh muttered greetings to the ERT and 2 Secret Service agents who were in the area. One of them had a blue tie with golfers in various poses. The other had a yellow one covered in little biplanes. Davy said, "This is the ground floor hallway. We can't see down it today as the president will be here later on. He won't want to see all this stuff trailing around." He was pointing to the cabling. Sarah wanted to know more. "Why, what's happening in here? I thought everything was going on outside." 2 television technicians walked past from left to right, escorted by their ERT minder. Josh was still talking quietly to the 2 Secret Service guys. Davy whispered, "At about 11, Arafat, Netanyahu, and the president will be in the diplomatic reception room for coffee." He nodded his head towards the TV crew, who were now walking back towards us. "These guys are rigging up a remote for CNN that's going to put out live coverage. The leaders stay there for 20 to 30 minutes, then move out for an early lunch." Sarah was trying to work out where the diplomatic reception room was, pointing past the screens. "That's the oval-shaped room down there on the right, isn't it?" Davy nodded. "Yeah. After lunch, they then move to the blue room. That's the same shape and directly above on the first floor. Then, at 1 o'clock, they walk out onto the lawn and get blasted by the heavenly choir." He screwed up his face again at the thought of 200 kids out of tune. Josh came over and joined us. "Hey guys, I think we better move on." We got the hint. The Secret Service guys didn't want us around so near coffee time. We started down the corridor to the right, following the cables. Davy sparked up, pointing at a large, white double door at the end of the corridor. "That leads to the west wing, where the briefing area is." The cable went through a door on the left of the corridor. We turned right and entered one of the admin areas. The smell came back to me. To the left was another lift. "That's the service elevator for the state dining room." Davy was clearly enjoying his role as tour guide. "It's directly above us on the first floor." To the right of the lift was a spiral staircase. We stopped by the elevator. Davy had a huge grin on his face. "I gotta show you folks the burn marks you Brits made last time you made an unannounced visit." A trolley headed towards us, pushed by an efficient-looking mid-50s black guy in black trousers, waistcoat, tie, and a very crisply laundered white shirt. It was laden with coffee pots, cups and saucers, biscuits and all sorts. The guy said, "Excuse me, gentlemen," then saw Sarah and added, "And lady," in a very courteous manner as he cruised past, the cups rattling on the metal trolley. Basically, of course, he was just telling us to get the fuck out of the way. He was a man with a mission. We climbed down the spiral staircase as Davy continued his running commentary. "We have 2 other elevators, 132 rooms and 33 bathrooms." Josh chipped in, "And 7 staircases." I tried to raise a smile of acknowledgement. At any other time this would be interesting, but not now. At the bottom we stopped by a pair of fire doors with thick wooden panels inset with 2 rectangular strips of wired, fire-resistant glass and covered with dirty hand marks where they got continuously pushed. Above them sat a large slab of stone supporting the archway. Black scorch marks were clearly visible. We've kept them there just as a little reminder of the sort of thing that happens when you guys come to town. Not that you stayed that long. We'd had more than enough of you by then. There was more laughter. I saw Sarah check her watch. Davy said, "You know, people think that it was called the White House after you Brits burned it down. Not so. It only got its name in 1901 under—" He turned to Josh for the answer. "Roosevelt." Josh looked up at us sheepishly. "Hey, if you work here, you have to know these things." There wasn't much we could say, and there was only so much burned stone we could look at. After a minute or so, Davy said, "Okay, let's go bowl a few." Chapter 27. As we pushed our way through the fire doors, I could see maybe 25 or 30 meters of white painted corridor in front of me, each side of which were white wooden doors slightly inset into the walls. The whole area had a functional feel. It was lit by strip lighting, with secondary lighting boxes positioned at key points in case of power failure or fire. The same cookhouse and polish smell hung in the air. There was no activity down here at all. Our footsteps squeaked on the tiles and echoed along the corridor. We came to a pile of cardboard boxes and bulging bin liners stacked against the wall. "It's just like any other house," Davy said. "All the junk goes into the basement." We passed several of the white doors and came to a grey metal one with a slowly flashing red bulb above it. Davy pointed up. "Let's see who's in." He swiped his ID card through a security lock and said, "Welcome to Crisis 4. He opened the door and gestured us in. I followed Sarah into a darkened room which contained a bank of at least 20 CCTV screens, set into the wall in banks of 3. Each carried a different picture, with a timecode bar at the bottom ticking away the milliseconds. The coloured views were of large, richly decorated rooms and hundreds of metres of corridors and colonnades. On a desktop that ran the whole length of the console, illuminated by small downlighters, were banks of telephones, microphones and clipboards. I went in and moved to one side so that Josh could follow. The temperature was cooler in here. I could hear the air conditioning humming gently above me. Lined up in front of the banks of screens were 4 office chairs on casters. The sole occupant of the room was sitting on one of them, dressed in ERT black, his baseball cap illuminated by the screens as he mumbled into one of the phones. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were glued to the screens. I could see the light from them reflecting off her face. The phone went down and Josh called out, "Yo, Top Cat, how goes it?" TC spun round in his chair and raised both arms. "Hey, fella, I'm good. It's been a while." He was white and looked in his mid-30s, with a very smart, well-trimmed moustache. They shook hands and Josh introduced us. "This is Nick, and this is Sarah. They're both from the UK, friends of mine. This is TC. We both walked over to him, and he stood up to shake hands. His chin already had shadow, and he looked as if he needed 5 or 6 shaves a day. Either that, or he'd been on duty all night. He was maybe about 5'6", with short, dark brown hair under his black cap. TC's firm grip contrasted with his very soft southern accent, but both oozed confidence. "What have you seen so far?" "Josh has been showing us what happened the last time the Brits were down here." Sarah had a question to ask Davy. "Do you think it would be possible to see the state dining room? It's just that I'm a big fan of Jackie O, and—" Davy looked at TC, who shrugged apologetically. I'm sorry to have to tell you folks that no one could go upstairs today. Josh felt that he had to explain. Access depends on what is going on. Just about any other day would have been fine. Hey, thousands of people visit most days. It's one of Washington's biggest attractions. Sarah and I both started waffling variations on the theme of, it's no problem. It's great just being here. We're really enjoying it. Davy sounded like he had a good idea. I tell you what, from here you can see it all anyway. He pointed at the screens and then proceeded to give us a quick rundown. As I said, this room is Crisis 4. It's one of the control centers from where any incident in the White House or grounds can be monitored and controlled. Which control center is used depends on where the incident occurs. Sarah and I were all eyes and ears as we looked at the screens, especially the one that showed the press briefing room. Not much had changed in there. I kept my eye on it, though. TC took over the brief as he went back to his chair. Crisis 4 could be used, say, if anything happened upstairs. The President and the First Lady would be moved down here to the secure area. It also doubles as the bomb shelter. There's a kind of neat room beyond this for the VIPs. He pointed at the screen. There's the state dining room. That's kind of neat, too. It didn't look as if lunch was going to be served there today. The long dark wood table just had silver candelabras placed along its center. Apart from that, it was bare. Sarah studied the picture for a while, as if taking in all the detail of the decor. My eyes were focused on the shot of the briefing room. Is that the diplomatic reception room? Sarah put her finger on a screen to my left, pointing to a doorway. Looking over, I could see the brown screens blocking off the ground floor corridor and the ERT escort standing over the CNN guys, who were still fiddling about with cables. TC confirmed it. That's right. In a minute now, you'll see the big three appear and walk in there. At the moment, they're across the hall in the library. As I watched the picture he was indicating, flicking back to check the briefing room every few seconds, our friendly waiter came out of the reception room and walked back towards the brown screens. This time his trolley was empty. I heard comms mush coming from TC's earpiece. The coffee's there. All we need now are the drinkers. The ERT guy began to move the CNN people out of the corridor, back towards their wagon. I flicked my eyes over at one of the screens again. Shit. Bill Gates was in the briefing room. At least the hair and glasses matched what I thought he looked like. He had walked in and was just looking around. I needed Sarah to confirm, but she was the other side of Davy as we all stood around TC in his chair. I kept looking at her, trying to catch her eye. I couldn't say anything yet. I could be wrong. Why wasn't she also checking that screen? They were focused on the other one with the 4 Secret Service men at the far end of the corridor. More mush was coming from TC's earpiece. Here they come. A few seconds later, the 3 world leaders walked out into the corridor and turned towards the camera. They were moving quite slowly so that Arafat could keep up. I checked Bill Gates. He was now sitting down and writing. I looked back at the other screen, then at Sarah. Come on, look at me. Check the screen, do something. She was oblivious to anything but the 3 leaders as a group of advisors followed them, clutching folders and nodding with each other as they walked. Hey, let's give you folks a lesson. TC leaned over the desktop and hit a button on the console. A speaker in front of us burst into life. A very quick but calm New York voice was giving commands over the net. People were acknowledging him in just the same tones. It sounded like mission control at Houston. Small red buttons were now lit on 3 of the microphones on the desk. I checked Bill Gates. He hadn't moved. They walked along the corridor for a short way. Clinton between the 2 others as they moved in line abreast. A few paces more and they turned left into the reception room. I looked across at Sarah. She was checking the large green digital display clock on the wall. It was 10:57. They were right on time. "Hey, Sarah, isn't that Gatesy? You know, that reporter friend of yours?" I couldn't think of anything else to say. I pointed and everyone turned to look. Sarah took a step forward and looked at the figure sitting down, reading his notes. Standing back, she looked at me. "No, it's not. His hair is much darker, but they do look similar." TC stood up. "That's it, folks. I've got to go." He hit the console button. The sound and red microphone lights died. We all shook hands again. "I hope you people have a good trip. Ask these two nicely. See if they'll take you over to the treaty room." Davy said, "It's on the itinerary, after the alley." TC nodded as he headed for the door. "See you guys. Hey, Davy, don't forget 4:30 this afternoon. We've got that meeting." They ran through a few details of their work admin while Sarah and I, the gooseberries, just stood by, keeping an eye on the briefing room screen. We followed TC out of Crisis 4. When we were all out in the corridor, he made sure the door was secure, then turned right and walked off towards the fire doors with a cheery wave of the hand. A couple of Hispanic women came squeaking along in white overalls and white patent leather shoes, looking like a cross between cleaners and nurses, and talking at 100 miles per hour in their own language. They stopped as they passed us, nodded and smiled, then returned to their warp-speed conversation. We turned left and moved further down the corridor. Josh had an idea. "Hey, you know what? I'll go over and see if I can get us into the treaty room, and maybe even the VP's office." "That would be great," I said. "Would we still be able to watch the press brief?" Sarah joined in. "Yes, I'd love to see that as well. I have—" Josh smiled as he put his hands up defensively, like a parent fending off an over-enthusiastic child. "Hey, no problem. In a few." He turned and walked towards the fire doors. Sarah and I exchanged a relieved glance as Davy led the way. We stopped, 2 doors down. Davy grinned. "This is the best room in the house." He opened the door. Inside was an open space, maybe 15 feet by 15, with stackable plastic chairs arranged around the walls, the same as in the briefing room. Beyond that, in shadow, was a single-lane bowling alley. The floor was highly polished lino. The walls were painted white and covered with a couple of posters of bowling teams, and pushed against it was a large wooden box, also painted white, with compartments which looked as if they were holding about 8 or 9 pairs of bowling shoes. There was whirring and clicking as all the bits and pieces of alley machinery came to life, and the strip lighting along the alley flickered on. Davy smiled back at us as he walked towards the shoes. "I've got a great story for you guys." By now the bowling balls were rolling up onto the stand, and the pins were being positioned by the machine at the bottom of the lane. Davy had his back to us, his shoulders rolling as he anticipated his own story. His head moved to look at us both again, and he pointed at the top pair of shoes. "You see these?" We both nodded. He looked back to pull them out. I took the opportunity for a quick look at Baby G. 55 minutes to go until the press brief. Davy turned round to walk back to us. "These are Belle's personal bowling shoes," he said. "Look at the size of the things. They must have been something like size 16 at least. He's a big man, all right." Hefting them in his hand, he chuckled. "You know the old saying, big feet, big—" He suddenly checked himself, in case Sarah didn't approve. She was smiling. The shoes were white with red stripes. As Davy reached us, he turned them round and showed us something. "See this?" All smiles. He pointed to the back of the shoes. I saw that each had a little mark in black felt tip. "One day Belle came down with some of his bowling buddies. He went to get his shoes, and a couple of the advisors saw this written on the back. He pointed again. On one was the letter L, and on the other an R. There they were, supposed to be discussing world affairs, and his aides was suddenly more worried about how he'd react to people writing on his shoes. Well, Bill picked them up, and for a moment there was silence. I could tell old Davy Boy had told this story many, many times, because the pauses were in just the right places. Yep, there he was, the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, and someone had gotten a pen and done that to him. Nobody was too sure how he was going to take it. Anyways, he looked down at the shoes, and then Bill started to laugh. I'll tell you what, boys, this is just what I need. They are so darn confusing, not being proper shoes and all. Davy started to laugh. I wasn't sure if the story was funny or not, and nor was Sarah. I just took Davy's lead and joined in. I could hear Sarah standing slightly behind me doing the same. The laughter died down and Davy carried on, pleased with our reaction. And that's why it's still there. Apparently Bill says it cuts his prep time by a half, so there's more time to play. He was going to put the shoes back. He turned away and took 2 steps, and there was a thud. Bill's shoes fell out of Davy's hands. There was no blood until he hit the floor, face forwards, and then it started to spurt from his head, dark and thick. I swung round. Sarah was in a perfect firing position, standing at 45 degrees to Davy, with her right pistol hand out straight, pushing the suppressed weapon at the target, her left hand cupped around both the pistol grip and the other hand, pulling back. She looked so relaxed. She could have been on the range. "What the fuck are you doing?" I shouted. What a bone question. I could see precisely what she was doing. I didn't know why, but I was half whispering, half shouting as she lowered the pistol. "For fuck's sake! We agreed no killing! What are you doing bringing that thing in? We don't need it!" She just stood there, in a different world, calmly putting the pistol back into her waistband. This was out of control. No matter what happened now, we were in a world of shit, and I had no idea by whose rules we were playing. I started to move towards the door. She looked at me quizzically. "Where are you going?" "I'm locking the door. What do you think I'm doing, letting everyone in? We're in deep shit, Sarah. Do you have any idea what you've done? This won't stop anything, it makes it worse." I reached the door and turned the lock inside the tumbler. It was pointless going over to Davy. There wasn't a sound from him, and dark, deoxygenated blood seeped from his mouth. I stayed where I was, shaking my head in disbelief. "It was under control, Sarah, for fuck's sake. Midday, the press brief, remember? What the fuck are you doing?" She started towards the door. I moved across her, putting my arms up to stop her. "Whoa, this is way out of control. It's time to stop this now and get help. Just get thinking of a fucking good story." I pointed at Davy as I turned towards the door once more. Why had she done it? It took 2 seconds before it became obvious to me why. She'd stitched me up. "You fucking bitch." I started to turn back towards her. At the same instant, I felt pain explode in my stomach. The wind was knocked out of my lungs as I fell to my knees. I felt a fierce burning sensation on the left side of my gut. The left side of my forehead hit the floor, then my nose. There were sparks flashing in my head. I tasted blood in my throat. I'd never taken a round before. I couldn't see Sarah. I was too busy curling into a fetal position as I tried to control the pain. I started a low, moaning noise that I couldn't stop. I slowly rolled my head to find her. She was crouched over Davy. His ID was now around her neck. At a casual glance, she would look part of the environment. Her loafers tiptoed around him, avoiding the blood, then took the pistol from his belt and the 2 mags from their carrier. I didn't want her to know that I was still alive. I lay as motionless as I could, eyes closed, trying to stifle my own moaning. It wasn't working. I sensed her standing over me. I opened my eyes. She was just too far away for me to reach her, even if I'd been able to. She looked at her watch, and then at me. The weapon came up and stopped in line with her eyes. For the first time in my life, I thought of someone I would miss, and I decided that my last thought would be about Kelly. I looked at Sarah and waited. There was a delay, but no emotion, no explanation. Then she said, "You have a child now. I hope you live long enough to see her." She lowered the weapon, checking her watch again as she walked away. The tumbler was turned and the door opened. I tried to shout, but it didn't happen. The only sound that came out was a weak rasp. "Fuck you." Blood sprayed out of my mouth. She glanced down at me, no reaction in her eyes. There was a pause as she checked outside, then the door closed quietly. She was gone. The pain was intensifying. I looked around frantically for a panic button or a phone, but I couldn't see too well. Things were getting hazy. 2 others left to kill him. My arse. It had been her all along. How the fuck did I not see it? Being curled up in a ball on the floor wasn't going to do me or the VIPs any good. I needed to do something even if it didn't work. As I died, I would at least know that I'd tried to right my fuck up. My vision was starting to blur. I was taking short, sharp breaths and my stomach muscles were tensing of their own accord. I moved my hand over a hole in my belly the size of a 5-pence piece and plugged it with my thumb. At least I didn't have to worry about an exit wound. I knew it was subsonic ammunition for the silenced Chinese thing. The round would still be kicking around inside me somewhere. I dragged myself towards the door, through a pool of Davy's blood which had started to ooze across the lino, and I was just about to pull myself up to open it when it swung inwards and connected with my skull. Curled up again in pain as more sparks flashed up in my head, I was just about switched on enough to know that I was stopping the door from opening fully. Encountering resistance, whoever it was got their body weight behind the door and pushed hard. I was shunted along the floor until they could get in. It was Sarah again. She didn't talk, just closed the door behind her. Then, grabbing hold of my feet and avoiding the blood, she started to drag me face down across the room, grunting with the effort. I felt as if I had a magnesium incendiary burning in my stomach. I tried to keep tensed up, and all I could see was a dark trail of blood where my body had just been. After 4 or 5 paces, she dropped my feet on the floor. I moaned as I curled up, trying to reduce the pain as she aimed her pistol at the door. It opened. Josh had good news. "Hey guys, it looks like we're going to—" I tried to shout a warning, but nothing came. The expression on his face was of utter shock and disbelief, his eyes looking even wider behind his lenses. Sarah was in front of him in a perfect firing position, calmly pointing at his centre mass. People take a while for this kind of information to sink in, especially if they're not expecting it. But Josh was catching on fast. Sarah maintained her very cool, controlled voice. "Close the door, Josh." His eyes flicked between the 2 of us, took in Davy's prostrate body, then mine, and finally settled on the pistol, no doubt trying to work out how the fuck she'd brought it in. "Close the door, Josh." If Josh was scared, he wasn't showing it. He was taking in all the information without saying a word. He did as he was told and then stood stock still, showing Sarah his hands. She said, "You will now turn around and put your hands on your head." He knew the routine. If you've got your back to the person who's pointing the pistol at you, you can't assess what's going on. Move out of the blood, then down onto your knees. Once you're on your knees, you're very vulnerable. She had more instructions. With your left hand, using your thumb and forefinger, take your weapon out. Do it now. I was helpless, just a curled-up bundle of shit. I heard voices in the corridor. I recognized the loud Hispanic accents of the two white-shoed women walking from the direction of the fire doors. Sarah quickly checked her watch again. Should I call out? I didn't have the strength. They wouldn't hear me. I looked over at Josh, who I could see side on. He was considering the same option. He wasn't flapping as he obeyed her, his finger and thumb on the pistol grip. I am taking it out now, Sarah. Good, Josh. Now put it on the floor behind you. Keeping his right hand on his head, he flicked the weapon behind him onto the lino. I could see the sweat coming down from his bald head onto his face, and the wet patches in the armpits of his jacket as he raised his arm again. Fear is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a natural reaction. You've just got to be able to control it. He'd been here before and knew what to do. For a moment, I had the strange feeling that I was in an audience, looking at actors on a stage. I knew exactly what would be going through Josh's mind. He'd be wondering how he was going to get out of this, and just waiting for the chance to do something about it. Anything. Blood is the same as milk. Drop a carton on the floor, and it looks as if 3 have been emptied. Davy's blood had spread outwards and was mixing with mine around my face. I didn't have the energy or inclination to move. I just spat from time to time to try and keep it from going in my mouth. Sarah threw Josh's weapon the length of the bowling alley, and the clatter echoed around the walls. She checked her watch once more. Okay, Josh. This is what you will do. Are you listening? He nodded. You will take me to the diplomatic reception room. You will be my escort. Do you understand? He was very calm as he answered, I can't do that. Americans have this wonderful, total conviction about themselves and their country. Even when they're up to their necks in 10 types of shit, they have this unshakable belief that everything will be all right, that America is behind them and the 7th Cavalry will come over the hill at any moment. After being captured during the Gulf War, as opposed to asking for things, American prisoners would demand them. They just knew they were on the winning side. In the regiment, you always knew that if you were in the shit, you would never be left behind. And that was sometimes the only thing that helped you through. But the Americans believed that at a national level. I wished I had their confidence. Sarah couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. What? Josh said simply, I will not do that. There was a pause, and I watched Sarah's face for a reaction. It wasn't long coming. Josh, you've got some thinking to do, and not a long time to do it in. Think about your children. This is no time to mess about with your family, Josh. Take me to that room or you will die. I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to be dead soon anyway. She had certainly listened to my brief on how to get Josh to do what she wanted. She checked her watch. If she needed to get to the diplomatic reception room before the end of the coffee break, there wasn't much time left. They're great kids, Josh. And they need you. You're all they have left. Besides, she smiled her curious little smile, you could even try to stop me. You can't do that if you're dead. I'm either going with you or on my own. With you dead, in 10, Josh. I saw his chest rise and fall as his body took in more oxygen to suppress the shock it was experiencing. I could only guess what he was thinking. Do I die now? Or do I accept what she's saying and try to prevent it on the way? At least then I'm going to be alive for a little longer. I had blood in my throat and my voice was hoarse as I said, "Take her, Josh. Just do it." He looked at me, and our eyes locked. I could see for sure what he was thinking now. You fucking asshole. No matter if I had known what she was going to do or not, to him I was now the world's biggest bastard. Fair one. I looked up at Sarah as she gave the final warning. It's make your mind up time. She didn't have long until the coffee break ended. He looked at the wall, thought for a few seconds more and quietly said, "Okay. If you try to fuck with me, Josh, know this. I will kill you before anyone has time to react. I don't want your president. I just want the other two. But if you fuck with me, do you understand me?" He closed his eyes and nodded. When he opened them again, he fixed them on mine. I hoped my eyes were saying, "I didn't know this was going to happen, mate. And I'm sorry. So sorry." But his expression told me it was a bit late for that. Now that she was going to have an escort, Sarah took off Davy's ID card and put her own one back on. That was detail. And detail counts. She said, "Let's go." She stepped back from the door as Josh walked towards it. "My weapon might be hidden, Josh, but at the slightest sign that you're fucking with me, I'll ensure that I get you first." He nodded, looked back at me and walked out. She followed without giving me a second glance. Chapter 28. Everything was out of focus. My head was spinning. I was losing too much blood. Between us, Davy and I had the lino pretty much covered. But now wasn't the time to worry about that. I had to accept that I'd been shot and get on with it. I struggled onto my hands and knees, sucked in a couple of deep breaths and started to crawl over towards the abandoned ID card. Every movement was agony. With each bend of a knee or stretch of an arm, I felt as if a red-hot saw was working on my stomach. It took me what felt like forever to cover the 10 feet or so. My head was swimming as I tried to pull the nylon loop over my head without disturbing the injury in my guts. When I'd finally finished, I couldn't even remember why I'd done it. I began crawling to the door, coughing, spitting lumps of blood, moaning to myself like a drunk in a gutter. My clothes, face and hair soaked with my blood, and Davy's. On my knees, I fumbled with the handle like a panicking child. It was a normal knob, with a tumbler lock in the middle, but I couldn't make my hands work. My fingers weren't listening to my brain, or maybe it was just that they were too slippery with warm red fluid. I knew what I was trying to do, but I couldn't accomplish it. Maybe it's true that your life can flash before you as you die. I was suddenly looking down a long tunnel, to when I was about 6 years old and fell through a glass roof into a garage. I'd been with a gang of older boys running across the roof as an initiation test. I hit the ground, cut and bruised, and had to fight with the door bolt to escape. I was so scared that I couldn't make any sense of how to pull the fucking thing across, and once I'd got through all that, there was no way I was going to show them how much it hurt. They let me join their gang. My hands started to shake as they slithered around the door handle. I was losing it. I knew I was going to die soon. I didn't care. I just didn't want it to happen until I'd at least tried to stop Sarah. I forced myself to calm down, take deep breaths, and tell myself what I needed to do, just as I'd done back in that garage. It worked. "Help! Help me!" I tried to shout, but could only manage a weak splutter. Not surprisingly, nothing happened. I couldn't just lie there in the doorway and wait. Pressing myself against the frame, I scrabbled and pushed myself upright and, head reeling, I half turned, half fell into the corridor. I bent over, leaning against the wall for support, my left hand clutching my stomach. Blood smeared along the white plaster as I stumbled towards Crisis 4. She didn't have far to go. If Josh fucked up and got zapped, she'd just have to follow those TV cables and she'd be there. My only hope was to find TC. Anyone would be a start. I focused hard. There was no red light on outside Crisis 4. Shit. I started to look for a fire alarm, though at that moment I didn't think I'd recognize one if it hit me in the face. I felt my reserves of strength ebbing by the second as I swiped the ID card through the machine and tumbled through the door. There was a picture on every screen, but they were moving in a slow spin like a kaleidoscope. I started crawling again. I didn't know how I got to TC's chair, let alone off the floor and into it. All I knew was that, as I tried with every ounce of whatever strength I had left to focus on the screens, I could see her. Sarah and Josh had just come out of the kitchen area. The ERT guy hadn't moved from the area of the brown screens and just turned towards them as they appeared. Spitting out the blood and mucus that was gathering in my throat, I hit the microphone switch. Mayday! Mayday! Black man, white woman on the first floor. Mayday! Mayday! I didn't know if it would mean anything to them, but I hoped they'd get the idea. There was no reaction from the ERT guy. Then all three slipped out of focus and became a blur. I screwed my eyes shut and opened them again, spitting out another mouthful of crap onto the desk. Refocusing, I could see the ERT guy motioning to them to either move out towards the staircase or go back into the kitchen. I lifted my head to look at the picture above, which was showing what was happening on the other side of the brown screens. There were a few people in plain clothes at the far end, but no reaction from them either. Fuck it. I tried again. All stations. All stations. Then stopped, my head resting next to the base of the microphone. The red light wasn't on. I started leaving bloodstains over as many buttons as I could reach, wishing I'd taken notice of which ones TC had hit when he turned off the speaker. I got a light. Mayday! Mayday! First floor! Mayday! The ERT guy was switched on and responded immediately, moving towards them. Sarah was quicker. She must have seen his face react to the message from his earpiece. She drew her weapon, instinctively aiming from the stomach as soon as it was free of her waistband. Josh dived on her, but too late. She fired. The ERT guy dropped like a bag of shit. Then, within a second of the struggle, so did Josh. Fuck. What had I done? Sarah turned and ran as the corridor filled with blurred figures in plain clothes and black uniforms. The cameras were now cutting from location to location as the main control room tried to get a fix on her as she disappeared off the screen. I knew where she was going. I swiveled round on the chair and with my left hand on my gut, forced myself to my feet. The door shimmered in front of my eyes as if I was looking through a heat haze. I staggered into the corridor. I didn't look round, just turned right and faced the fire doors. There couldn't have been much of the stuff left to be pumped around, but adrenaline was getting me up and moving. She'd be here soon. The Secret Service would bring the principals down to the shelter until everything was clear, and she'd aim to cut them off. I crashed through the 2 doors and looked up just as Sarah was taking her last steps down the spiral stairs. She was going shit or bust, head down, pistol in hand. I couldn't think of anything else to do but throw myself at her in some sort of rugby tackle. Perhaps it would have helped if I'd ever played a game of rugby. I collapsed against her, throwing my arms around her waist and linking them together behind her back as her momentum propelled me backwards into the swing doors. She was still moving, taking me with her, cracking me on the head with her pistol. By now, I really couldn't feel that much. My arms slipped down to her legs, and she started to fall with me. The fire doors flew open again as we burst through. We both hit the ground and the doors swung back, trapping my lower legs. She was stretched out, her back on the floor, and I was wrapped in a mess around her feet. I could make out the pistol was still in her hand. My guts wrenched and screamed as I kicked my legs free from the doors and scrambled up her body, slapping my hand down heavily on her forearm to hold the weapon down. She kicked and bucked to try and get me off her. She was like an insect on its back, frantic to get upright. I became aware of screaming, shouting, and heavy footsteps echoing round the area, but it was as if a mute button had been hit, and everything was happening a long way away. I didn't care where the noise was coming from. All that mattered was her left hand, which was going for Davy's pistol now that she couldn't use hers. I could feel it in her waistband as I moved further up her body. Her resistance got stronger. It was as if she was having some sort of fit, her head and body thrashing from side to side. I put all my weight on her. It wasn't that difficult. I was fucked. Her hand struggled to work its way between us towards the weapon. Our heads were so close together that I could feel her breath on my face. I had to headbutt her. There was no other way. She reacted noisily. The 3 times I made contact, I heard the back of her head bounce off the floor. It was messy, but it slowed her up. My head now hurt almost as much as my stomach. I was in shit state. Keeping my forehead pushed against hers, blood dripping from my mouth and nose, I prized the gun out of her grip as she tried to clear her nose and mouth. I rammed the barrel into her windpipe and looked at her, my forehead still putting pressure on hers. She didn't return my stare as I tried to focus, just closed her eyes and tensed her body as she waited for death. Our bodies rose and fell with her laboured breathing as the doors were kicked open, and I began to make sense of the shouting from behind me. The mute button had been deactivated. "Release the weapon! Release the weapon now! Do it!" I thought about it for the 2 seconds I would have before they pulled or shot me off her. Her body relaxed, and she opened her eyes and looked at me. It was almost an order. "Do it. Please." Fuck it. I tilted the gun upwards, and it slid 2 inches until it jammed under her chin. Pointing it towards her skull, I let my head move aside. Her eyes followed mine as I flicked off the safety and pulled the trigger. Blood and splintered bone splashed onto the side of my face. I'd finished the job I'd been ordered to do. That was what I made myself think. A moment later, I felt the pain shoot up my arm as someone kicked the pistol out of my hand. I was manhandled onto my back. I looked up, and there was ERT black everywhere. Then Josh loomed over me, blocking out everything else, blood dripping onto me from the mess on his face. They tried to pull him off me as he started to give me a good kicking. It wasn't working. I turned on my side and curled up to protect myself, and through the haze I could hear orders being shouted and the general confusion around me. I was losing it. Josh was still screaming above me and managed a few more kicks. It didn't matter. I could no longer feel them. What I really wanted to happen did. I became unconscious. June 1998. I came out of the flat on Cambridge Street, checked I'd put the key on the ring of my Leatherman, and closed the door behind me. It was a strange feeling, being a virtual prisoner here in Pimlico. I'd brought plenty of worried-looking people here in the past, but never imagined that someday I'd be one of the victims myself. The debrief was taking forever. The firm were trying to strike a deal with the Americans. Both sides wanted this to go away, and they weren't the only ones. It had been 4 weeks since I'd come out of hospital, and I'd been confined to the area ever since, under what amounted to house arrest. I was getting paid, and at operational rate, but it still wasn't a good day out. None of my injuries hurt much anymore, but I still needed bucket loads of antibiotics. The entry wound had sealed up quite well. All that was left was a dent in my stomach, coloured the same vivid pink as the puncture wounds in my arm. Walking down the last couple of stone steps to the pavement, I looked to my left at the crowd enjoying an end-of-the-week drink at the picnic tables outside the pub. Friday evening's rush hour had turned the whole street into a car park. The traffic fumes were cooking up nicely in the early evening sun. The heat was unusual for this time of year. It felt more like Los Angeles than London. I crossed between the stationary vehicles, heading for the all-in-one shop on the corner. The Asian father and son combo were used to me now. Dad started folding a copy of the Evening Standard as soon as he saw me come in. I felt like a local. Weaving back over the road, I headed for the pub. There were just as many people inside, and above the din, Robbie Williams was giving it full volume on the sound system. The smell of smoke, stale beer, and body odour reminded me not to come here again. It did that every night. I worked my way towards the rear where I knew it wouldn't be so packed, and besides, that was where the food was. I'd started to recognise some of the regulars. Sad fucks like me, with nowhere else to go. Or office workers big-timing it, or old men smoking their roll-ups and spending an hour nursing a warm pint. I asked for my usual bottle of pills and, helping myself to a handful of peanuts from one of the bowls, headed for a booth. The one with the most room was occupied by an old man who looked as if he'd just come from a British Legion outing, all tie and association badges. He couldn't have been there long. His bottle of light ale hadn't yet been poured into his half a bitter. "Anyone sitting here, mate?" He looked up and shook his head. I eased myself into the seat slowly, taking care that my jeans didn't ride up and expose the tag around my right ankle. Taking a swig of pills, I opened the newspaper. It was all the usual doom and gloom. Ethiopian and Eritrean forces had stopped bombing the shit out of each other with their MiG-23s to give foreign nationals time to be airlifted from the war zone. That was the sort of work I liked. Just plain and simple war. You knew where you stood with that shit. I scanned the rest of the news sections, but there was still nothing about what had happened in Washington. Still no mention of the injuries to the ERT guy and Josh. And I knew now that there never would be. Lynn had given me the American Party line during one of our little evening rides around town. The press release was short. A stressed-out member of the domestic staff had become temporarily deranged in the White House basement. It was a minor incident, dealt with in minutes. The 3 world leaders hadn't been made aware until well after the event. The most the story ever got was a column inch in the following day's Washington Post. I was glad the ERT guy hadn't died. He'd just been wounded in the thigh. Something to tell the grandchildren about. Josh had got it big time in the face. Lynn said the round had split the flesh on the right side and made his mouth look as if it ended by his ear. I'd been told the surgery was a success, but I doubted he'd ever be modelling for Calvin Klein. My one hope was that his Christian thing would work in my favour. Sitting in the flat a few days earlier, waiting for the debriefing team to arrive, I'd been listening to Thought for the Day on the radio. "If you can't forgive the sin," the voice had said, "at least try to forgive the sinner." Sounded good to me. I just hoped Josh could get Radio 4 in his truck. I hadn't spoken to him yet. I'd wait a while, give him time to calm down, and me time to work out what the fuck I was going to say. I hadn't seen Kelly since the Americans released me into the firm's custody. We'd spoken on the phone, and she thought I was still away working. She said that Josh had called. He'd told her nothing about what had happened, just that Sarah and I had visited. I still had no regrets about killing Sarah. The only thing that pissed me off was that every time in my life I'd let someone get close to me, they fucked me over. Everybody, that is, apart from Kelly. It seemed to be my job to do that to her. I'd blown it again by making promises I couldn't keep. She still wanted to go to the bloody tower, and she wanted to go with me. 3 times now I'd arranged it, only to cancel at the last minute because the debrief dragged on. At least she was going to her grandparents this weekend. Carmen and Jimmy would spoil her rotten. I took another long swig of pills. Fuck the antibiotics. I usually forgot to take them anyway, and checked Baby G. They started serving in 20 minutes. The debrief was going okay, I thought, but you never knew with these people. I wasn't getting as hard a time of it as I might, mainly because Lynn and Elizabeth were potentially in just as much shit as I was, and were taking measures to cover their arses. Even so, every event of those 5 days was being dissected in great detail. Not documented, of course. How could it be? It hadn't happened. Not that any of it meant much. I was lying to the team, using a script supplied by the good colonel. I'd RV with him each evening, and the Serb would give us a few laps of London. As Lynn had said, "You need guiding, Nick, on some of the more, shall we say, delicate areas of the operation." And of course, to avoid the slight problem of the T-104, since not even the investigation crew would be aware that such things existed. The only ones in the know were lowlife like me, Elizabeth and Lynn. To the investigators, I didn't even have a name. I was just referred to as the paid asset. That suited me just fine. Lynn had already told me that I'd been sent on the job because, if anyone could find her, I could. But I knew there was more to it than that. It had become blindingly obvious that those 2 fuckers had known all along what she was up to, and thought I'd be so pissed off with her I'd feed her through the grinder without a second thought. They'd even known where she was hiding, but wanted me to go through the process of finding her. They reckoned that if I thought I'd tracked her down through my own efforts, and if what I saw on the ground confirmed their story, that would put me even more in the mood. There were still loose ends, of course. I still couldn't work out if Metal Mickey was part of Lynn's game or not. After all, Lynn did say he was loyal. But to whom? Fuck it, who cared? It just annoyed me that these people could never just tell it straight. Why bother to tell me all that bullshit? I would still have done the job if I'd known the truth. The fucking games they played pissed me off, and worse, they put me in danger. Naturally, nothing in the big picture had been changed by Sarah's death. Bin Laden was still out there doing his stuff. Yusuf had closed down, but he'd probably resurface in a year or 2. And I still wasn't going to be getting permanent cadre. They said I'd be a disruptive influence on the team. I'd try to get a bung instead, claiming that what happened in the White House might have been my fuck-up, but I did stop the president from being shot. Well, you have to elaborate a bit. It didn't work. Even the deafest old duffer in the pub must have heard their laughter. All I got was the promise that if a single word came from my lips that was off-message, I was history. My major concern now was, what did I get up to after this? I needed to get some real money together so I didn't have to carry on getting fucked over by these people. Maybe I'd take a look at the American rewards program. Bounty-hunting terrorists, white supremacists, and South American drug dealers wouldn't be so bad. Maybe I could try and recover those stingers from the mudge. Who knows? The bottle was empty. People were 3 deep at the bar, and it took ages to get myself another. As I rejoined my mate in the booth, I was again careful not to expose the light grey band of plastic around my ankle, housing its 2-inch by 2-inch box of electronics. I checked my watch again. Just over 10 minutes till the peanuts disappeared and the menus were put on the bar. Not that I needed one. I knew it off by heart. I thought about Sarah again. I'd learned more about her in my stints with Lynn than I had in all the time I'd known her. I'd always felt that she was holding something back from me, and in my stupid way I'd decided it was because she was scared of intimacy. Sitting back on the cigarette-burned red velour, I started to pick at the label on the pills bottle. The old man bent his neck as he tried to read the headlines on my paper. I passed it across the table. The night before last had been another hot and humid one. Lynn had picked me up as usual for our daily debrief on the debrief, but this time in his new Voyager. It looked like the firm's budget had got a bit of a boost this new fiscal year. The air conditioner was going full blast. The Serb, as ever, kept his eyes fixed on the road. "How was all this allowed to happen?" I said. "How come you didn't suspect her earlier?" Lynn kept his gaze on the real world beyond the darkened window. Elizabeth voiced concerns. He shrugged. We took a few people aside for a word, but there was nothing we could put our finger on. The false flag operation in Syria seemed like a good moment to put her to the test. Lynn obviously held a lot more pieces of the puzzle in his hand than he was letting me see. But he did tell me this much. The Syrian operation had only been taken on by the Brits as a means of checking whether Sarah was bin Laden's best mate. It was Elizabeth's idea. Sarah changed the data, killed the source and covered her tracks. She was good at doing that. I thought back to her giving the American a round in the head after taking his clothes in the forest. But she wasn't good enough in Syria. Without knowing it, Sarah confirmed that she didn't exactly go to sleep every night humming Rule Britannia. It was then just a question of letting her lead the way to bin Laden. The only problem for Elizabeth was that she had omitted to fill in the Americans when Sarah was posted to Washington. Lynn had turned and looked at me, as if to underline his next disclosure. Things got slightly out of hand when Sarah took an active part in the ASU, he said. Once that had happened, how could we tell our friends across the sea? That was where you came in. I let that one sink in amongst all the other crap I was trying to make sense of. The investigating team had been clutching at straws to explain Sarah's behaviour, and I wasn't doing much better. I asked him, "Do you know what turned her?" He seemed to know everything else. We'll never completely know, will we? People are still trying to fathom out T. Lawrence. And who really knows what made Philby and the rest do what they did? There was a pause. A team went to Sarah's mother to pass on the tragic news. She was saddened, of course, but very proud of her daughter's most untimely death in the service of her country. I thought her parents were dead. No, just her father. He died when she was 17. A team have been weaseling with the mother for a few weeks now. You know, trying for any links or information that may be useful. Sarah's father George, they had learned, was a big-time oil executive who was a stern disciplinarian and a major league hypocrite. He'd spent his whole working life in the Middle East without ever getting to like the Arabs. Unless, that is, they were either royal or wealthy. Preferably both, and took to all things Western in much the same way that flies take to shit. The right sort of Arab certainly didn't include his lower-class domestic staff and their 9-year-old son. The friendship between Sarah and Abed had been perfectly innocent, the mother had said. The fact was, her daughter was just desperately lonely. But as far as George was concerned, inside every Arab was a rapist just waiting to get out. The two kids were inseparable. Sarah was an only child, pushed from pillar to post all her life, with a remote, domineering father, a placid, ineffectual mother, and no opportunity to make lasting relationships. You wouldn't need to be an agony aunt to understand her joy in finding a friend at last. George, however, was not amused. One day, Abed's mum and dad didn't turn up for work. Nor did the boy come round in the afternoon as he usually did. The whole family seemed to have vanished. Then, just a few days later, Sarah's father pulled the plug on her education in Saudi and packed her off to a UK boarding school. It was only after her father had died that Sarah learned what had really happened. She was helping her mother go through her father's things when she came across a gold Rolex Navigator. Sarah said, "I never knew Daddy had one of these." Her mother looked at the watch and burst into tears. The Rolex had been given to him by a grateful business acquaintance. It was George's prized possession. He had accused Abed of stealing it and thrown the whole family out onto the streets. With a reputation as thieves hanging over them, their chances of ever working again would have been ziff. They would have seen out their days as dust people, the lowest of the low, outcasts from Saudi society and living on the edge of starvation. Sarah waited until her mother had finished, then left the house without another word. She never saw her again. "Of course, I don't go along with all this nonsense about blaming everything in your life on the traumas of childhood," Lynn said. "My parents dragged me around Southeast Asia until I was 7. Then I went to Eton. Never did me any harm." The menus were being plonked unceremoniously on the bar counter by the girl who'd served me before. The thought of dishing out another 100 stuff and chips obviously didn't fill her with too much excitement. I decided on the pie and another beer. The same as last night, and the night before. A quick look at Baby G told me it was 7:48, just over half an hour until my RV. Traffic was still clogging the street by the time I left, but at least it was moving. I turned left, checked my watch yet again and headed towards Victoria Station. 13 minutes till the pickup. I turned 2 corners and stopped, waiting to see if anyone was following. They weren't. Crossing the road, I cut through a housing estate that was packed with K-Reg, Vauxhall Astras and Sierras, sat on a wall by the rubbish chute and waited. Half a dozen kids were skateboarding up and down the only bit of clear tarmac they could find. The slip road in front of me that led onto the main drag towards the station. I listened to their banter, thinking about when I was where they were. I thought of Kelly, the girl who'd had her whole family killed, and now had a stand-in father who constantly let her down. And worse than that, much worse, I was probably the closest thing she had to a best friend. Sarah's words came back to me. "You have a child now. I hope you live long enough to see her." I cut away from all that and got back to real life by reminding myself of the 2 big lessons I'd learned in Washington. The first was never again to be so soft with someone who showed emotion towards me. I had to stop kidding myself that I knew or even understood that sort of stuff. The second was easier. Always carry a pistol. I never wanted to play Robin Hood again. It was last night as I sat, watched and listened. Sarah's word still bugs me. "You have a child now." The Voyager would be arriving any minute. I looked at Baby G and thought about George's Rolex. And then I knew what I had to do. I wasn't exactly a top-of-the-range example for Kelly, but the very least I could do was be dependable. Maybe, just maybe, the one thing that Sarah had given me by sparing my life was the chance to do the right thing. Moving swiftly away from the RV point, I jumped a fence that secured a communal garden. Crouching in the shadows, I pulled the Leatherman from my pocket, opened the knife blade, and cut away at the plastic encircling my ankle. The pliers made short work of the half-inch steel band that ran beneath. I knew that the instant the circuit was broken, the alarm would be raised. Even as the tag was being binned in the bushes, the standby team would be running for their cars, getting briefed via their body comms, personal radios. Jumping back over the fence, I headed towards Victoria at a controlled, fast pace. Fuck 'em. What were they going to do? Well, quite a bit, but I'd worry about that when it happened. It wasn't as if I was doing an out-and-out runner. I'd be back in the flat on Sunday, talking to the morons about Afghanistan. The only difference would be that I'd have acquired 2 new friends with necks as big as the Serbs, assigned to guard me 24/7, just in case I was overcome again by the desire to take a weekend off. There were sirens behind me now on the other side of the estate. They must be flapping big time to call in the police. As I neared the station, I just hoped the investigating team had kids of their own, and would understand when I explained to them on Sunday that all I wanted to do was take my child to the bloody tower for a day out. After all, I'd made her a promise. A normal person's promise. Crisis 4 is published by Random House Audiobooks, a division of the Random House Group. Copyright Andy McNab, 1999. Copyright, in recording, Random House Audiobooks. Andy McNab has asserted his right under the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988 to be identified as the author of this work.
Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program.